Clara had always dreamed of a quiet life, one where she could breathe without feeling the weight of someone else's judgment pressing down on her chest. For years, though, that dream had stayed locked away in the back of her mind, hidden beneath the reality she lived every single day. The house she called home no longer felt like home at all. The walls seemed to echo with criticism, the silence between her and her husband heavier than any argument. Each morning she woke with the same thought: something had to change. The final push came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She stood by the kitchen window, watching raindrops slide down the glass, and realized she could no longer pretend. Her marriage had turned into a cage, and she was shrinking inside it. She had tried everything: patience, forgiveness, compromise, but nothing ever made it better. Her husband's voice still cut her down. His disapproving look still made her small, and the love that once held them together had long disappeared. That night, while he was out, she packed a small bag. Just a few clothes, some money she had been hiding away for months, and her passport. Her hands trembled as she zipped it shut. She wasn't sure where courage came from in that moment. Maybe from the years of silence she had endured. Maybe from the tiny flame of hope that refused to go out. But she knew she had to act. The plan was simple. She would leave early in the morning, catch a flight to her sister's city, and disappear for a while. She would figure out the rest later. She didn't need everything to be perfect. She just needed to get away, to breathe fresh air without fear of being watched or judged. She told herself over and over, one step at a time. The next morning, she slipped out before dawn. The streets were still dark, quiet and damp from the night's rain. Clara carried her bag tightly against her chest as if it were her lifeline. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought people could hear it, but no one paid her any attention. At the train station, she bought a ticket to the airport and sat nervously by the window as the city rolled by. Each passing building felt like a farewell. By the time she reached the airport, the sky had brightened, though the clouds still hung heavy. Clara had never felt so nervous. Her palms were sweaty as she handed her passport to the woman at the check-in counter. She half expected someone to stop her, to call her name and drag her back, but the clerk simply smiled and handed over the boarding pass. For the first time in years, Clara felt the faint taste of freedom. She didn't have much time before boarding, so she hurried toward her gate. The airport was crowded, a blur of voices and footsteps, and Clara's mind buzzed with anxiety. She double-checked the screen, but in her rush and panic, she didn't realize she was heading toward the wrong terminal. She only wanted to get on the plane as quickly as possible, afraid that if she stopped, doubt might catch up with her. At the gate, she scanned her pass and walked down the jet bridge, clutching her bag like a shield. Once seated on the plane, she leaned back, trying to steady her breath. She told herself she was safe now. She didn't notice at first that something was off. The announcement sounded routine, and she barely listened. Her eyes were fixed on the window, watching the wings outside, feeling the vibration of engines beneath her seat. When someone took the seat beside her, she instinctively pulled closer to the window. The man greeted her politely, his tone calm, but Clara only nodded faintly. She wasn't in the mood to talk, not when her mind was still running through 1,000 fears. What if her husband discovered she was gone? What if she couldn't manage on her own? What if this was a mistake? She closed her eyes as the plane began to move. The moment the wheels left the ground, a tear slipped down her cheek. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was a mixture of fear, relief, and exhaustion. For so long she had wanted to escape, and now she was finally in the air, suspended between the life she was leaving and the life she hadn't yet found. The man beside her noticed, but he didn't intrude. Instead, he quietly slid a packet of tissues onto the shared armrest without a word. Clara hesitated before taking one. She whispered a thank you, barely audible, and wiped her eyes. It was such a small gesture, but it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Still, she kept to herself. The flight attendants moved down the aisle offering drinks. Clara asked for water, her voice trembling slightly. She drank slowly, trying to calm her nerves. The man next to her ordered coffee and opened a book, giving her space. That simple respect for her silence made her shoulders loosen a little. As the flight continued, Clara tried to distract herself by staring at the clouds outside. She wondered what her sister would say when she arrived. Would she be surprised? Angry that Clara hadn't told her sooner? Or would she simply open her arms and let her stay? Clara didn't know, but she clung to the thought that at least she would not be alone. What Clara didn't realize yet was that she wasn't on the plane she thought she had boarded. Somewhere in the confusion of gates and announcements, she had walked into a completely different flight. She was heading not to her sister's city but to a place she had never even planned to visit. For now, though, she was unaware. She let herself drift into restless sleep, her bag clutched tightly on her lap. The hum of the engines and the steady presence of the man beside her eased her slightly, though the knot of fear in her stomach never fully disappeared. Hours later, when she opened her eyes again, the plane was still high above the clouds. She glanced at the man next to her who was still reading, his calmness almost unsettling. Clara wondered briefly about his life, who he was and why he seemed so at peace while she felt like her world was breaking apart. She shook the thought away. Her focus had to be on her own survival. She had made the first move by leaving, and now she had to keep moving forward no matter how uncertain the path looked. Little did she know, fate had already shifted her path for her. The wrong plane, the wrong city, the stranger sitting beside her. Everything was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Clara woke up when the flight attendants moved down the aisle again, serving snacks this time. The bright cabin lights stung her eyes, and for a moment she had to remind herself where she was. She straightened in her seat, rubbing her forehead. The man beside her had closed his book and was now quietly watching the clouds through the small window, lost in his own thoughts. When he noticed Clara stir, he gave her a polite nod. She nodded back, though her instinct was still to keep her guard up. For so many years she had learned not to trust too easily, not to let strangers see too much. But there was something different about this man. His calmness didn't feel forced. He seemed comfortable in silence, which in a strange way made her less uneasy. She reached for the small pack of biscuits the flight attendant had placed on her tray. Her fingers trembled a little and she dropped the packet. It slid halfway under her seat. Before she could reach down, the man leaned over, picked it up, and handed it back. "Here you go," he said softly. Clara whispered a thank you, embarrassed by her clumsiness. She ate slowly, her stomach still tight from nerves. The man didn't press her with questions, but after a while he made a light comment about the weather outside, saying how peaceful the clouds looked from above. His voice was gentle, not intrusive, and it felt like a safe invitation to respond. Clara nodded and agreed, adding that she had always liked looking out of airplane windows because it gave her a sense of distance from her problems. As soon as the words left her lips, she felt exposed, like she had revealed too much. But he didn't react strangely. He just smiled faintly as if he understood. For a long stretch they didn't talk. Clara alternated between staring outside and closing her eyes, though sleep wouldn't come back. Her mind replayed everything she had left behind. The last argument at home, the way her husband had looked at her like she was nothing, the fear that he might try to find her once he realized she was gone. But she reminded herself she was already in the air, already far away. That thought gave her a small spark of relief. The man beside her eventually broke the silence again, asking if this was her first time on this route. Clara hesitated. She didn't want to admit she had mixed up her flights. Instead, she simply said, "It's my first time traveling like this." It wasn't a lie. She had never boarded a plane alone before. He nodded in understanding and didn't ask more. Something about his patience drew her in. She found herself watching his small gestures, the way he folded his hands on his lap, the calm way he sipped his coffee, the steady breathing that contrasted her restless energy. Without realizing it, Clara started to feel a little more grounded just by sitting next to him. Later, when the cabin lights dimmed for the long flight, Clara gathered enough courage to speak. Her voice was low, careful, as if testing the air. She told him she was traveling to make a change in her life. She didn't give details, but even saying that much felt heavy and real. He listened without interrupting, his attention steady but not pressing. When she grew quiet, he said, "Sometimes the hardest step is the first one, but once you take it, you'll see the road clearer." Those words stayed with her. Clara wasn't used to encouragement. She was used to criticism, to being told she wasn't enough, that she couldn't survive on her own. Hearing a stranger say something so different with such quiet confidence stirred something inside her. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap, and admitted softly, "I was scared I wouldn't be able to leave at all." The man didn't ask for explanations, but his expression softened. "The fact that you're here now means you were stronger than your fear," he said, Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. It felt strange to have someone recognize her strength when she herself doubted it every moment. She leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the engine surround her. For the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't completely invisible. The hours stretched on. Clara drifted in and out of sleep, waking sometimes to the quiet sound of pages turning as the man read again. At one point, turbulence shook the cabin and Clara's heart leapt in panic. She gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Without a word, the man rested his hand lightly near hers, not touching but close enough to let her know she wasn't alone. Clara forced herself to breathe slower, matching the calm rhythm she noticed in him, until the plane steadied again. When the announcement finally came that they were approaching the city, Clara's heart began to race again. Relief mixed with nerves. She told herself she was close to safety, close to her sister, close to freedom. She gathered her things, clutching her bag with both arms as the plane descended. But as the plane touched down and the cabin filled with chatter, Clara glanced at the screen above the aisle, and her stomach dropped. The name of the city was not the one she expected. Confusion flashed through her. She checked her boarding pass again, her hands trembling. Somehow, in her rush at the airport, she had boarded a completely different flight. Her chest tightened. Panic rose like a wave. She wasn't where she planned to be. Her sister wasn't waiting here. She was stepping into an unknown city with no one expecting her, no one to turn to. The man beside her noticed her pale face. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated, shame burning in her cheeks. She didn't want to admit her mistake, but she could barely breathe. Her words came out in a whisper. "I think I got on the wrong plane." For a moment he studied her, not with judgment but with concern. Then he said gently, "It happens more often than you think. Don't worry, you'll be okay." Clara shook her head, clutching her bag tighter. "I don't know anyone here," she admitted, her voice cracking. He nodded slowly, as if considering what to say. "Then maybe this is just a different beginning," he said. "Sometimes the places we don't plan to go end up showing us the way." His words didn't erase her fear, but they gave her something to hold on to as the plane rolled to a stop. Clara sat frozen for a moment, listening to the sound of passengers unbuckling seatbelts and pulling down bags. She had no idea what she would do once she stepped off. But as she looked at the stranger beside her, calm and steady in the middle of her storm, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Clara stepped out of the plane with her heart pounding. The crowd of passengers moved quickly toward the terminal, but her legs felt heavy. She gripped the strap of her small bag so tightly that her fingers ached. Every step felt uncertain because she knew she had made a mistake she could not undo. The city she had landed in was not where her sister lived. She was in a place she had never been before, with no one waiting for her. The terminal was bright and loud, filled with the sound of rolling suitcases and announcements over the speakers. Clara walked slowly, almost in a daze. She followed the signs toward baggage claim even though she had only one bag with her. Her mind spun in circles, trying to figure out what to do next. Should she try to buy another ticket right away? Should she call her sister and admit what had happened? But what would she say? She didn't even know how to explain it to herself. The man who had sat beside her on the flight walked a few steps behind her. When she glanced back, he gave her a calm nod, as if telling her she wasn't as alone as she felt. That small gesture gave her just enough strength to keep moving. Once they were outside the security area, Clara stopped near a bench and sat down. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She unlocked it, stared at the screen, but didn't dial. Her sister's name stared back at her from the contact list, yet she couldn't press the button. She imagined her sister's voice full of worry, maybe even frustration. The thought made her chest tighten. She wasn't ready for questions, not yet. As she sat frozen, the man approached. He didn't sit too close, but close enough for her to hear when he spoke. "You look like you're carrying too much inside," he said softly. Clara tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "I got on the wrong plane," she admitted again, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded as though he had already guessed. "It happens. And you'll figure it out," he said. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want to show. "I don't even know where to start," she said. For a moment, the man looked thoughtful. Then he said, "Start with something simple. Get a place to rest tonight. Tomorrow you can think more clearly." Clara hesitated. He was right, she was exhausted. The rush of leaving, The hours of worry, the shock of ending up in the wrong city. It had drained her. But she didn't know where to go. She had never been to this city. She didn't know which parts were safe or how to find her way. As if sensing her hesitation, he added, "There's a hotel near the airport. Safe, simple. You don't have to decide everything right now." She looked at him, trying to measure his words. He didn't sound pushy. He didn't offer to take her anywhere himself, only gave her an option. That made her feel slightly safer. After a long pause, she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded and then, with the same quiet tone, said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then he stood, picked up his suitcase, and walked toward the exit. Clara watched him go, feeling an odd mix of relief and loneliness. Part of her wanted him to stay, because his calm presence had kept her steady on the plane. But another part of her knew she needed to learn to stand on her own. She sat for a while longer, gathering her courage. Finally, she opened a map app on her phone and searched for hotels nearby. Just as the man had said, there was one within walking distance. She booked a small room online with the little money she had saved and then slowly made her way there. The evening air outside was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Clara pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked. Every sound, the rolling of suitcase wheels, the hum of cars, seemed sharper, heavier because she was so aware of being alone. Still, she pushed forward until the hotel sign came into view. Inside, the staff greeted her warmly. Clara kept her answers short, not wanting to draw attention to herself. Once she was in her room, she locked the door, dropped her bag on the bed, and sat down heavily. The room was small but clean, with white sheets and a window overlooking the street. It felt safer than the airport, but her heart was still unsettled. She sat there for a long time, staring at her phone. Finally, she sent her sister a simple message. "I'm safe, but I made a mistake. I'll explain later." Then she turned the phone face down on the table, unable to handle more right now. That night, Clara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Her mind replayed the man's words on the plane. The hardest step is the first one. But once you take it, you'll see the road clearer. She wondered who he was, what his story was. He had listened without judgment, something she wasn't used to. In her heart, she felt grateful their paths had crossed, even if only for a few hours. The next morning, Clara woke early. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting the room in pale gold. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memory returned, and with it came a strange mixture of fear and determination. She had landed in the wrong city, but she was free. She reminded herself that freedom was messy and unpredictable, but it was still hers. She showered, dressed, and sat at the small desk in the room with her notebook. Clara had carried it secretly for months, filling its pages with thoughts she couldn't say aloud. Now she opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Day 1. I don't know what comes next, but I'm still standing." After breakfast in the hotel lobby, Clara walked outside to explore a little. The streets bustled with life, people heading to work, children in school uniforms, vendors setting up stalls. Everything felt unfamiliar, but there was also a strange beauty in it. For the first time in years, no one was watching her. No one was telling her where to go or what to do. The thought gave her both comfort and fear. As she wandered, she bought a small coffee and sat on a bench. She watched the flow of strangers moving past her, each carrying their own stories. She wondered how many of them were also running from something, how many were searching for a new beginning like she was. Clara pulled her phone from her bag and checked for messages. Her sister had replied during the night, "I'm glad you're safe. Call me when you're ready." The kindness in those simple words made Clara's eyes sting with tears. She wasn't ready yet, but she promised herself she would call soon. Later that day, Clara returned to the hotel. As she stepped into the lobby, she noticed a familiar figure near the counter. It was the man from the plane. He was speaking with one of the staff members, his suitcase beside him. Clara froze, unsure if she should approach. Part of her wanted to thank him for his kindness, but another part feared she might be intruding. Before she could decide, he turned and noticed her. His expression shifted into a faint smile, one that carried recognition but not surprise. "You found a place," he said simply, as though he had expected her to manage. Clara nodded, feeling a little awkward. "Yes, thank you. For what you said yesterday." He inclined his head slightly. "You didn't need much help. You just needed a reminder." She didn't know how to respond, so she stayed quiet. He didn't press. Instead, he wished her well again and walked toward the exit. Yet this time, Clara found herself calling after him. "Wait!" He turned, waiting. Clara swallowed hard, then asked, "Why were you so kind to me? You don't even know me." For a moment, he looked thoughtful. Then he said, "Because sometimes one kind word can change the weight someone carries. I've learned that much." Clara held his gaze, feeling something shift inside her. She still didn't know what would come next, but she knew this encounter wasn't ordinary. She had boarded the wrong plane, yet it had brought her to someone who had shown her a different way of seeing herself. As he left, Clara whispered to herself, maybe it wasn't the wrong plane after all. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how long she would stay in this city or what paths she would take. But she knew one thing. Her journey had already changed. And somehow she believed she was strong enough to keep walking forward. Clara stayed in the city longer than she expected. At first, she thought she would only spend one night there, gather her thoughts, and then book another ticket to her sister's place. But something in her hesitated. The city felt unfamiliar, yes, but also full of possibilities. Each morning when she stepped out of the small hotel, she saw faces she had never seen before, streets she had never walked, and she realized no one here knew her story. That gave her a sense of freedom she had never known. Still, she was unsure what to do next. She had money saved, but it wasn't enough to live without working. She knew she couldn't stay in the hotel for long. On her third morning there, she sat in the lobby, notebook in hand, trying to plan her next steps. She had just written a line, find something small, start from there, when she noticed someone walk in through the glass doors. It was the man from the plane. He was dressed neatly, carrying a briefcase this time instead of a suitcase. He moved with quiet confidence, like someone who belonged wherever he was. Clara felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. She thought their paths had already separated, yet here he was again. He noticed her sitting in the corner and offered a polite smile. Clara hesitated, then returned the smile, though hers was small. He walked over and said, "Good morning." Settling in, Clara nodded. "I'm trying," she admitted. He studied her for a moment. "Trying is a good start," he said. Something about his words, always simple yet steady, gave her comfort. They spoke for a few minutes, mostly about the city and how busy it seemed. Then he checked his watch. "I have a meeting," he said. "But if you need anything, advice, directions, you can ask." Clara thanked him, though she wasn't sure she would ever take up his offer. But after he left, she felt a little less alone. Over the next few days, Clara tried to adjust. She walked the streets, visited small shops, and kept her eyes open for help-wanted signs. She found a little cafe that was looking for part-time staff and asked if they needed someone immediately. The owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, agreed to give her a chance. The pay was modest, but it was enough to cover simple needs. Clara was grateful. Working in the cafe gave her something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She learned to take orders, clear tables, and chat with customers in a warm, polite way. It was tiring, but the kind of tired that came with satisfaction. At night, when she returned to her small hotel room, she felt proud that she had managed another day on her own. One evening, as she was leaving the cafe, she noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. It was the man again. He waved when he saw her. Clara crossed the street, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "I come here sometimes," he replied. "They have good coffee." Clara laughed softly, the sound almost unfamiliar to her ears. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. They ended up walking together toward the hotel district. Along the way, they spoke more than they ever had before. Clara, without meaning to, shared a little about her life, how she had left her marriage, how she was afraid but determined to rebuild. She didn't go into painful details, but even the little she said felt like a heavy load off her chest. He listened quietly, never interrupting, never asking for more than she was willing to give. When she finished, he said simply, "You've already done the hardest part. You chose yourself." Clara felt her eyes sting, but she held back the tears. "It doesn't feel like I'm strong," she said softly. "Strength doesn't always feel like strength when you're living it," he replied. "But it's there." The words stayed with her long after they parted ways. Days turned into weeks. Clara continued working at the cafe, slowly building a routine. The man appeared now and then, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes in the lobby of the hotel. Each time their conversations grew a little deeper. She learned that he was a businessman, though he spoke of it humbly. He had built his success over years of hard work, but he didn't boast about wealth or status. What struck Clara most was his kindness and respect. He never made her feel small. He never pushed her for more than she could give. One afternoon, after a busy shift at the cafe, Clara found him waiting outside. She was surprised but not upset. They walked together and he asked how her work was going. She told him she was learning, that it felt good to earn her own way even if it was little. He nodded approvingly. "Independence is worth more than money," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "That's what I'm hoping to find." As they strolled, they passed a small park. Children played on the swings, couples sat on benches, and the air was filled with laughter. Clara stopped for a moment, watching the scene. Something about the ordinary happiness there touched her. She realized how long it had been since she felt safe enough to pause and notice simple joys. The man noticed her expression but said nothing. Instead, he waited quietly, giving her space. Clara was grateful for that. As weeks went by, their paths continued to cross. Sometimes it was chance, sometimes it was because he stopped by the cafe. Each meeting added a small piece of trust between them. Clara began to see him not just as a stranger who happened to sit beside her on a plane, but as someone who genuinely cared for her well-being. One evening, after closing the cafe, Clara found herself walking with him again. This time she gathered the courage to ask something she had wondered for a while. "Why do you keep checking in on me?" she asked. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because I can see you're rebuilding something important, and I respect that. You remind me that courage comes in many forms." Clara didn't know what to say. For years she had been told she was weak, incapable. To hear someone speak of her courage felt unreal. But slowly she began to believe it might be true. Their conversations grew longer, touching on dreams, fears, and the idea of second chances. Clara never felt pressured to share more than she wanted, yet she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. The more she spoke, the lighter she felt. The city, once strange and frightening, began to feel less intimidating. Clara rented a small room not far from the cafe so she could leave the hotel behind. It wasn't much, just a bed, a table, and a window, but it was hers. She decorated it with small touches, a plant from the market, a second-hand lamp, her notebook on the table. Each little detail made it feel like a step forward. One evening, she invited the man to see her new place. She was nervous, unsure if it was right, but she wanted to share her progress with the one person who had encouraged her from the start. He accepted politely, and when he stepped inside, he looked around with quiet approval. "It's simple," Clara said quickly, almost apologetic. "It's yours," he replied. "That's what makes it special." Clara's throat tightened at his words. She realized then how far she had come. From the night she slipped out of her old life with nothing but a bag, to this small room that represented freedom. She wasn't where she thought she would be, but she was finally building something for herself. As he left that evening, he told her, "Keep choosing yourself, one step at a time. You're doing well." Clara stood at the door after he was gone, repeating the words in her mind. For the first time, she truly believed them. Clara's life in the new city slowly began to take shape. Each day at the cafe gave her a little more confidence. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning to live again. Her world was still small, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She often thought back to the night she left her old life behind. The memory still carried pain, but now when she remembered it, she didn't feel trapped in it. Instead, she felt proud that she had chosen a different path. She had been afraid, uncertain, and yet she had walked away. That thought gave her courage to keep moving forward. The man she had met on the plane continued to appear in her life. Sometimes he came to the cafe. Other times they met by chance in the neighborhood. Their conversations always left her with something to think about. He never tried to control her decisions or push her into anything. He simply encouraged her to see her own strength, and that had changed the way she looked at herself. One evening, after closing the cafe, Clara and the man sat on a bench in the small park nearby. The air was cool, the trees swayed lightly, and the sound of distant laughter filled the air. Clara held a cup of tea in her hands, warming her fingers. "I used to think my life was already written," she said softly. "Like no matter what I did, it would always stay the same, but now I realize I can write it differently." The man nodded. "That's the power you always had. Sometimes it just takes time to see it." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She had never asked much about his own life. She knew he was successful, but he spoke very little about himself. That night, curiosity finally pushed her to ask, "Why do you care so much about helping me?" He was quiet for a while before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be lost," he said. "Years ago, I went through something that made me question everything. Someone helped me then, not by fixing my life, but by reminding me that I could rebuild it. I'm only passing on what I was given." Clara listened closely, touched by his honesty. She realized then that kindness often came from people who had known struggle themselves. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. As the days turned into months, Clara settled more firmly into her new life. She rented a slightly larger room, one with a small balcony that overlooked the street. She filled it with little things that brought her joy. Flowers from the market, second-hand books, a small rug she found at a thrift shop. These small touches made the space feel alive. She also grew closer to her co-workers at the cafe. They were ordinary people with their own worries and dreams, but they welcomed her warmly. For the first time in years, Clara felt part of a community. She laughed with them, shared stories, and slowly learned to trust again. One afternoon, the cafe owner told her she was doing an excellent job and offered her more hours. Clara accepted gratefully. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust someone placed in her abilities. That trust made her stand taller. The man continued to appear in her life, though never in a way that made her feel dependent. Sometimes he invited her to events or showed her parts of the city she hadn't seen. Other times he simply stopped by to share a quiet conversation. He never flaunted his wealth, never tried to impress her with material things. Instead, he gave her respect, space, and encouragement. That was worth more to Clara than anything else. One evening, after a long day at work, Clara sat on her balcony watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft pink and gold, and the air was filled with the hum of the city below. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the fear-filled days of her marriage to the terrifying moment she realized she had boarded the wrong plane. At the time, it had felt like a disaster. But now, sitting in her small but happy home, she realized it had been a turning point. If she had boarded the correct flight, she would have gone to her sister's house. She would have been safe, yes, but she might not have discovered this new strength within herself. She might not have met the man whose quiet kindness had guided her when she needed it most. The wrong plane had led her to the right path. The next weekend, the man invited her to join him at a charity event in the city. Clara hesitated at first, nervous about stepping into a world she didn't feel part of. But he reassured her. "You belong anywhere you choose to stand," he said. So she went. At the event, she saw a side of him she hadn't before. People respected him deeply, not just for his success, but for his generosity. Clara watched him interact with others, always with kindness and sincerity. She realized then that wealth didn't define him, character did. Later that evening, as they walked back, Clara said quietly, "I was scared I wouldn't fit in." He smiled. "You didn't need to fit in. You only needed to be yourself. That's enough." Clara thought about those words for a long time. She realized she had spent so much of her past trying to shrink herself, to fit into someone else's expectations. Now, for the first time, she was learning that being herself was more than enough. Over the following weeks, Clara began to dream again. Small dreams at first, saving enough to take a short trip, buying better shoes for work, decorating her room more fully. But soon bigger dreams formed. She thought about taking classes, maybe studying something she had always loved, but never had the chance to pursue. The thought scared her, but it also excited her. One evening, she shared these dreams with the man as they walked by the river. He listened carefully, then said, "You should do it. Don't let fear decide for you." Clara smiled. "You make it sound so simple." He shook his head. "It's never simple, but it's possible." And that's enough to begin. Clara realized then that she didn't have to figure out everything at once. Life could be built step by step, as long as she kept moving forward. Months later, Clara looked around at the life she had built. She had a steady job, a home of her own, friends she trusted, and dreams she was chasing. Most of all, she had a sense of self-worth she had never known before. She thought about the man often. Their bond had grown naturally, built on respect and honesty. Whether their connection would turn into something deeper, Clara didn't know yet. But she understood that his presence had been a gift. A reminder that kindness and respect could exist, that not every relationship had to take something away from her. One night, as she sat at her desk writing in her notebook, Clara reflected on everything that had happened. She wrote, "I thought I had lost everything, but in losing one life I found another. I thought boarding the wrong plane was a mistake, but maybe it was fate showing me where I truly belonged." She put the pen down, closed the notebook, and looked out the window. The city lights sparkled in the distance, alive and full of promise. Clara took a deep breath, feeling a calm strength within her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel trapped. She didn't feel small. She felt free. And it all began with a decision to walk away, a mistake at the airport, and a stranger who sat beside her on a plane. Clara had thought her story had already reached its turning point. She believed leaving her old life, building a new one, and finding her strength was the end of her journey. But life had its way of reminding her that change was never one single moment. It was a series of steps, some small, some big, all leading her to places she never imagined. The cafe continued to be the center of her daily life. She poured coffees, wiped tables, and exchanged stories with regular customers. Yet each day she noticed something new about herself. She no longer rushed through her shifts with fear or doubt. She moved with ease, greeted people warmly, and even laughed freely. It was in those little moments she realized how far she had come. One afternoon, the cafe owner pulled her aside. "Clara," she said gently, "have you ever thought about managing this place?" Clara blinked in surprise. She had never expected such a question. The owner explained that she wanted to open another branch in the city and needed someone trustworthy to help run the current cafe. Clara felt her heart pound. Part of her wanted to say no, afraid she wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. But another part of her whispered that she had already survived far harder things. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on her balcony staring at the street below, thinking about the offer. Her old self would have doubted every possibility, but now she asked herself a different question. What if I am ready? The next day she accepted the role. The cafe owner smiled warmly and told her she believed in her. Hearing those words made Clara's chest tighten with gratitude. It had been so long since anyone had trusted her with something important. The man she had met on the plane was one of the first she told. They met in the park, sitting under the same tree they had shared many conversations before. "They want me to manage the cafe," she said, her voice still filled with disbelief. He looked at her calmly, then nodded. "Of course they do. You've earned it." Clara frowned a little. "But what if I make mistakes?" He smiled gently. "Then you'll learn from them. Mistakes aren't the end, they're part of the path." Clara held on to those words as she stepped into her new role. Managing the cafe was not easy. She had to learn to schedule shifts, order supplies, and handle customers with different needs. There were days she went home exhausted, unsure if she had done enough. But slowly she found her rhythm. Her co-workers respected her and the customers appreciated her steady presence. In her free time, Clara began to explore her interests again. She signed up for an evening class in writing, something she had always wanted to try but never had the freedom for. Sitting in a classroom with a notebook in front of her felt both strange and thrilling. At first she doubted her ability, but as she put her thoughts on paper, she realized she had so many stories within her. Stories of survival, courage, and hope. The man encouraged her to keep going. "Your words could help someone the way you were helped," he told her one evening. Clara thought about that often. Maybe her story wasn't just for herself. Maybe it could give strength to others who felt trapped and afraid. As the months passed, Clara noticed her relationship with the man was deepening. They never rushed into anything, but their bond grew naturally. Sometimes they shared quiet walks, other times long conversations about life. He never treated her as someone broken. He saw her as whole, even when she struggled to believe it herself. One evening, after a busy day at the cafe, Clara found herself invited to his home for dinner. She had never seen his private world before, and part of her felt nervous. But when she stepped inside, she was surprised. His home wasn't filled with luxury as she had imagined. It was warm and simple, with books stacked on shelves and photographs of family and friends. It felt lived in, not like a palace meant to impress. Over dinner, they talked about their pasts. Clara shared more about her old life than she ever had before. She spoke of the fear, the silence, the way she had once felt like nothing more than a shadow. Her voice trembled, but she pushed through. When she finished, there was no judgment in his eyes, only quiet respect. "You've carried so much," he said softly, "and yet here you are, building something new. That's not weakness, that's strength." Tears filled Clara's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of finally being seen. She realized she didn't have to hide her scars anymore. They were part of her story, but they didn't define her future. After that night, their connection deepened even further. They still moved carefully, never forcing what wasn't ready, but there was a new closeness between them. Clara found comfort in knowing she didn't need to face life alone anymore, though she also knew she had the strength to stand on her own if she had to. Meanwhile, her writing class inspired her more each week. One evening, her teacher asked the students to write about a moment that had changed their lives. Clara hesitated, then wrote about the day she boarded the wrong plane. She poured out every detail, the fear, the mistake, the stranger beside her, and how that moment had led her to everything she now cherished. When she read her piece aloud to the class, the room grew silent. Then her teacher said quietly, "That's a story others need to hear." The idea stayed with her. Could she really share her story with the world? Would people understand? Clara didn't know, but she felt a growing sense of purpose. Maybe her journey wasn't just for her own healing, but to show others that even the wrong turn could lead to the right life. One night, as she walked home under the streetlights, Clara thought about her old life again. She realized something important. She no longer felt anger or bitterness. The past no longer held chains around her. It was part of her story, but it didn't control her. She was free. Weeks later, Clara stood on the balcony of her apartment, notebook in hand. She looked out over the city that had once scared her but now felt like home. She wrote a single line at the top of the page. "I escaped, I survived, and I found myself again." The words weren't just for her. They were for anyone who might feel lost, anyone who might think their mistakes had ruined them. Clara wanted them to know the truth. Sometimes the wrong plane could take you exactly where you needed to go. As the city lights flickered below and the night wrapped around her, Clara closed her notebook with a smile. Her journey was still unfolding, but she was no longer afraid of where it might lead. For the first time, she felt not just free, but ready. Ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Ready to live fully. Ready to write the next chapter of her life. Not as someone escaping, but as someone choosing.